Just a sec. Yep. All right, and we're live. Welcome everyone to another Growth Roundup session. Today we're joined by Ashley Williams. Ashley Williams is actually the community lead at Stripe, and I'm really excited to have her here. You know, we've been part of the journey with Stripe over the last year, and I've watched her grow the Stripe community all around the world, and it's been thriving since then. So last time Ashley and I connected, we were at Stripe Sessions, so we got to hang out in person, and also Ashley did a great session here in the Toronto office. So if anyone's tuning in, feel free to also watch that later on. So Ashley, welcome to Growth Pad Roundup. Today we're going to talk about how communities thrive and help subscriptions growth. So we want to get started by just learning a little bit more about you, where you grew up, and how you got involved in building communities.
Yeah, so I've been in the community space for almost 20 years now, which is wild to say out loud. I first got into community actually working at a company called Wix. And at the time, Wix was just this 100-person startup. Now it's a large publicly traded company with millions and millions of users. It's very well known, but at the time it was this tiny startup. And at that time, also, community didn't really exist as a concept in tech or in a corporate or a brand environment. I think my original title was something like events manager, because the idea of a community manager was so new. And it was actually great because I originally started by managing this physical space for Wix. It was called the Wix Lounge. And this was before WeWork. So co-working spaces were this very, very new kind of crazy concept for people. And so originally I was hired to actually manage this space, the Wix Lounge, and think about like how can we actually use this physical space to drive awareness of Wix, which was a tiny startup at the time, really thinking about like how do we have this organic grassroots growth through this physical space. And over time, I started thinking about, okay, how can we move beyond this space? So after doing all these events and co-working in the space, we started doing meetups and events all over the world. But at a certain point, that also didn't scale anymore. It's like, well, my team's traveling constantly. We're exhausted. How can we go bigger? And that's when we actually launched the Wix Ambassador program. And around that same time, you also started to have other people doing things like this at other companies. It started to be called community management. We started to talk to each other. So it was very cool. I got to kind of grow up with the industry as it was getting started, as some of its like founding professionals started to talk about what is community, how do we do it together. So it was a great foundation early in my career to really learn hands-on. And then from there, I went on and founded the community team for Airbnb's newest product at the time. It was called Experiences. They still exist. I highly recommend taking Experiences. So homes are places you stay, experiences are activities you can go on when you're traveling with really inspiring and cool locals. So I had the privilege of getting to build that experience host community from the ground up. And then during COVID, they moved me over to the homes team. Really said, like, how can you take what you learned in experiences and move it to homes? So I got to go over to the core side of the Airbnb business, grow the host clubs program to be this really global, vibrant program. Then I moved to a really cool ed tech company called Class Dojo and got to build a community of teachers all over the world. That was really inspiring for me because my husband's a teacher and also my son is in elementary school. So getting to work with elementary school teachers was really special. And then a year and a half ago, I got the opportunity to join Stripe. And as you said, Zane, it was a very unique opportunity because it was an opportunity to build the community from scratch, which you don't often get to do at a big established company like Stripe. Usually you're doing it at a startup. So getting to do it for such a mega brand like Stripe was incredibly exciting. And have had such support and trust from Stripe's leadership on the vision of the community, how we want to build it. And so it's been really inspiring the last year and a half to meet people like you, Zane, and empower some of our users to become leaders of the community and grow it from scratch. So really gotten to see community from lots of different types of businesses, lots of different types of community members, lots of different stages of companies. So we've gotten really that like 360-degree view of community, thankfully, in the last few decades.
Yeah, incredible. It's been so incredible also just watching you grow this whole community and build out that team. So, a lot of companies talk about communities, very few actually build one. And I'm curious, like, how do you define a thriving community?
So it's really different in the brand context or in any context. How you define a thriving community is different depending on the context you're in. And so each company will have a different definition of what success looks like. And even sometimes as you're transitioning in a journey of a company, like I think about when I was at Wix, what success looked like, in those early days of the company was very different from what success looked like post IPO many years later with millions of users. So I think that's always a big piece of advice I give anyone thinking about community, is that there isn't just like a golden metric or a golden answer. But I do have a framework I like to think about this in, that I think it does apply across the board, no matter what context you're building community in. So I think about it as grow, engage, and impact. So grow, first you have to actually establish the community. What is the human infrastructure? Who's in the community? Who's gathering there? How are they gathering? And then starting to scale that so you have enough critical mass so that like this thing is meaningful and it exists and there are people engaging in it. And then engage, once you've established the thing, you need to make sure it's active and vibrant. If you've built a community and it's a sad, dead zombie community, you might as well not have a community. So thinking about what is the suite of metrics that lets you know your community is healthy and engaged and active. And then finally, impact. So once you've established the thing is active, it's healthy, how are you actually leveraging that or engaging with that community, partnering with that community to drive impact for your business, if you're building community for a brand, or for your mission, if you're building community for a nonprofit or a cause. So really thinking about then, okay, what are we doing together as a community that is driving impact and is meaningful? And then that feeds everything else. If your community is meaningful and impactful and valuable, it will grow more, it will engage more. And so it kind of becomes a flywheel on the other side as well.
Yeah, I love that. Grow, engage, and impact. I'll definitely remember that. So you see a lot of startups, thinking that community is just a Slack channel or a Discord channel. I think that's like a common thing. Why do you think a lot of companies misunderstand what community actually is?
I think often it's this habit we have of starting with a product. I think that's very common in tech, and that's usually the way we approach things in tech. But really, with community, you have to start with the humans. It's a lot more like intentional design thinking. What you see a lot of companies make or founders make the mistake of is, okay, we're going to build a thing and people will come. But actually, you need to gather the people first, learn how they want to connect and engage, and then you build the thing for them. And so I guess it even is like goes back to if the habit is we build a product. When you're starting to build a product, you think about your user, you do research, you build a product to serve a group of people. Building a community is the same way. You should think about it in that way. Like, who is your audience? How would they want to gather? And building a space for them. Otherwise, it isn't going to thrive. If you build a product without thinking about your user at all, it's going to fail. It's not going to be designed for them. They're not going to adopt it. And it's the same thing when designing a community. You don't start with what is your stack. You start with what is your user, what is your ICP, and then you build around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been watching over the last 5 years a lot of big name companies like Anthropic, Cursor, even like smaller startups, really investing in community and kind of building those chapters in different cities. I'm curious to learn more about how do you what do you think is kind of the main reason that in the last 5 years it's becoming increasingly important.
It's such a powerful way for brands to have deep engagement and valuable, specialized engagement at high scale. To a certain degree, you can only hire so many people in your company to engage users, to talk to users, and you start to run out of steam. Often you stop meeting your smaller users even. I think that's a behavior I see a lot at companies where you kind of over-rotate towards your big users because you don't have the resources to engage your smaller users. Although your smaller users, often in aggregate, are probably worth more than a few of your big users. And also, your smaller users could grow up to be big users someday, especially if you're investing in them and you're fostering them and you're partnering with them from early on. They could then grow up to be from minnows to those whales. And so community is a really powerful way to do that at scale is, okay, how do we partner with our users, bring our users together? We have kind of this high touch engagement through partnering with our users in a way that we're bringing them together versus just talking at them. Anytime you're just talking at your users, treating them as an audience, there's only a certain level. It scales, but it's not deep engagement. And it's not ever going to be specific to the different use cases. It's not really going to address like, what is, Millie in Oklahoma's specific problem and why is she using your product? Whereas if you bring your users together, then you're able to unlock that deep engagement and specific engagement at a much greater scale. And the way that translates into business impact is different from company to company, but every company where I've worked, I've seen this be a core problem. There's something that's really, really important for the users, to give the users, to help the users, to explain to the users, but it's impossible to do at scale. And that's where community is a huge unlock of how can you actually have that deep human connection, but have it across, massive, massive numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And in subscriptions growth, kind of the holy trinity of subscriptions growth is acquisition, retention, monetization. And it seems like in community growth, it's like grow, engage, and impact, right? It's very similar. So we're gonna kind of maybe talk a little bit about some tactics, right? So let's say you're a startup. How do you start? We'll start with growth. So how do you start and grow a community? What do you recommend?
Well, start with your existing users. You have, and even if you have 5 of them, even if you have 2 of them, talk to them about, this is actually, as you know, Zane, how I approached the Stripe community. I went out and said, who's already talking about Stripe, engaging an audience around Stripe, who's already extra engaged with us? And I had conversations with you. I reached out to you randomly on LinkedIn and said, hey, can we just have a conversation about like, what would a Stripe community look like? What would be valuable to you? How would you want to contribute? What would you want it to look like? I'm a big believer that the most successful communities are ones that grow around existing green shoots. So they're built around existing energy and behaviors and motivations versus trying to force people to have new behaviors and new motivations. Like, talk to your current users. What would they want out of a community? How would they want to contribute? And that should be the very first place you start, is build what they suggest. Really think about, how do we take this existing energy and amplify it and partner with our users to grow it versus like building something in a silo and hoping people go to it maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking to the users, how do you decide on who are those users? I guess it's like you look at your customer base. What are some other things that you should look at? You're trying to decide who to talk to.
So I think a couple things, the default that people usually have with users is like, who are users that are using the product most or like making the most money off of the product? And those actually maybe aren't the right users to talk to. In some cases they are. I would look instead at like, who are the people talking about your product? Who are the people that are teaching others about your product? Who are the people that are building a living around your product? I think that's another really key one. Who's living and breathing your product? They're not just using it as like, here's a part of my stack, or here's a thing that like is running in the background. Like, this is core to their profession, to their career, to their identity. Those are the people you really want to find, because they're deeply invested in not just using the product, but also explaining it to others or coaching others around it. Those people are going to be natural leaders for the community. They're already essentially leading your community. So finding those people and engaging them is going to be your most successful first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, yeah, I guess that's usually in the beginning you kind of put it out there, and then you kind of try to figure out where your positioning is. But yeah, in terms of like your subscriptions growth, you've kind of been across all these amazing brands. Let's talk a little bit about some of the impact, right? So, talk about like some of the impact that you've seen the communities have made at Airbnb and what you're seeing now at Stripe. Curious to learn more about that.
Yeah, and as I was saying before, it's amazing how it's been different with every company and also even different over time at these companies. Like, I give the example of Wix a lot. When I joined, it was a small startup And it was really just about word of mouth. And there wasn't like a massive marketing budget. And so, even just like getting a group of 100 people in a room and having them hear about Wix was really impactful in those very, very early days. And so, my role was really about grassroots word of mouth marketing. How do we actually foster community to expose more people to the brand and partner with other communities to expose more people to the brand? But as the company grew, the marketing budget grew, and it got to a point where Wix was doing Super Bowl commercials, and so like user acquisition was happening in very different ways at that point. And so I looked around and I saw that there actually was an opportunity for my team to pivot from this word of mouth marketing motion to more of a product adoption motion. So what we were seeing more was that, okay, so we have these great streams for acquiring users, but now we need to think about how, okay, they're using, just like building their website on Wix, but how do we get them to use Wix e-commerce? How do we get them to use the Wix blog or all these other products? Or how do we get them from free to premium? And a lot of times explaining the value propositions of those products, or even just how to get started on those products, was too complex for a push notification or an email. And so started experimenting with having my team rotate more towards engaging our existing users towards product adoption. And actually my team ended up moving into the product team for a while because of that, because we developed such deep partnerships with the product managers. We were able to, on a quarterly basis, ask them, like, what insights did you learn from the community? How did the community evolve? How did you change the product based on this? And then how did that drive conversion? So got a really great muscle going on actually just like generating feedback, generating product adoption. And so that's, like, to me, an example I love to give about just how the value I was driving and my team was driving and the community was driving evolved over time at the same company, but still went back to this idea of like hands-on at scale. Airbnb similarly had a challenge where like hosting is very, very local. So like things that are impacting hosting and making hosting hard are things like, what do I price my listing in Rio during Carnival? When is trash pickup on this like major holiday? What are my local short-term rental laws? Are they changing? How do I pay my taxes here? And Airbnb had tried in many different ways to have just like giant lists and websites that listed all of these things for every single community in the world. But like it was really hard to find this out, to keep it up to date. And so what we saw was actually bringing hosts together locally to almost form like small business associations for hosting in their towns and cities and communities. We call them host clubs. They're still very vibrant and active today. Was such a powerful way to enable our hosts very specifically in a very hands-on way, but across every community and every city in the world, by just creating a mechanism where our hosts could come together and share this information with each other, so that we could offer that support for everyone in a way that was constantly evolving with the times and not trying to keep like this giant website up to date that kept breaking and becoming obsolete over time.
Yeah, totally. It's always interesting to see like how I guess community-led growth is starting to become more of a term now. Within software, product-led growth, sales-led growth are pretty common. Talk to us a little bit more about how the role of community has played alongside the product-led growth teams and sales-led growth teams.
I would say they're amplifiers. And you see great examples of both of these across lots of different companies. So for example, with like how community can complement product-led growth, Figma is a really, really famous example there, about how, partnering with their users to go out and actually like advocate for the product, get more users on the product. So while like the product was generating product-led growth, it was then being amplified by the community going out and doing that word of mouth growth, sharing, embedding themselves in different organizations that then eventually went all Figma. So you see that a lot. And then on sales-led growth, there's like a term that you hear a lot in community circles of like community qualified leads. And so instead of like marketing qualified leads, it's the idea of a community qualified lead. And you see a lot of companies like Gong is a great example of a team that's really thought about how does community embed itself in sales and partner with sales. Especially interesting since it's a product whose end user is sales as well. But actually, there's been a lot of work done by really great community professionals on how people that engage with the community are just far more primed to react positively when someone from sales reaches out to them. They're far more likely to convert. They're far more likely to engage, to become a user, especially because they have that social proof of other users they've engaged with through the community. They've usually heard of the brand before a salesperson reaches out to them or an SDR reaches out to them. So community can be a really powerful amplifier for both of those motions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more and more common now that companies are investing in in-person events, right? And how important do you think are in-person events versus some of the virtual stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard because you always have the conversation, especially when you're building community with a brand of like, well, events don't scale and they're expensive, and what is the ROI? And I do think that you have to be strategic. And I think in-person events are critical, 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 especially today. I think we're having a moment where everyone's out of this post-COVID, we are sick of meeting virtually world. So I do see right now, like in person is even more important than it used to be. People are craving it even more than they did because of this post-COVID moment. But I think your real deep connection and conversation and like those meaningful engagements happen in person. And so you have to think about like, how do you do that in a way that scales? How do you do that in a way that is cost effective? And so thinking about one, how do you empower your community to run events? How do you partner with them is one way that you see a lot of brands scale in person. The other thing we used to talk about on Airbnb experiences is like, what is our high touch motion and where events come in? Like, how are we strategically leveraging events to have like the highest impact? Like events are driving the highest possible impact for us. And then like, what is our like low touch motion at the same time that complements it? So for example, at Airbnb experiences, we invested in having these like summits. We call them Airbnb experiences summits. And in our top, it's like our top 25 markets, we did these full day events for all of our hosts in that market. And then like our long tail of 50, we did half day events. And these were like, this was supposed to be the like seminal moment for that market, our really high touch moment. And they were designed in a way that they would have life afterwards. And so it wasn't just like, we have this event, we spent money on this event, we go away. Like, how are we actually planning this event in a way that it has life and has impact in an ongoing way so that it's a very strategic high touch moment? And then how are we complementing it with lower touch motion? So in person is really, really critical, but it's important to think about how and when are you doing it strategically so that it scales, or if it doesn't scale, which sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay, how are you getting the most out of that really high touch, high impact moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to experience that firsthand. I was leading payments and subscriptions at Canva, and we used, a series of different payment providers, and Stripe was one of them. And I remember Stripe started hosting these Stripe tour events. I was in Sydney at that time, and I remember just going to that and made a pretty big impact. Like, as a decision maker as well. I was like, hey, I feel like I can get the support that I needed. There's people behind this product that can help me. And I remember we started kind of routing a lot more payments towards Stripe, ever since we felt like we had that support. So definitely felt that impact. And I know Stripe continues to do that in different forms, right? Like you have the communities going on, and then you have Stripe sessions and tours and all sorts of stuff. So it's always interesting to see like what are some metrics that community people and companies use to measure the impact. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what does leadership, wants to see in terms of like, numbers? How can, companies, what are some metrics they can track to see the impact of building communities?
I think it goes back to that grow, engage, impact model again. And you often want metrics for each of these. And you'll probably, in your early days of building your community, you'll probably skew more towards grow and engage. And then like really, because you can't really drive impact until you have those. And that's very much the reality I'm living today at Stripe is, and we're kind of moving from the grow stage into more what is the impact stage right now. And so thinking about for grow, how many people are in the community. For Stripe, it's thinking about, okay, how many, we have these incredible leaders like Zane in the community called Stripe Community Builders. So how many Stripe Community Builders do we have? How many events are they running? How many people are attending those events? And we just launched stripecommunity.com. So now we're thinking about how many members do we have in stripecommunity.com, because you actually have a place to go and become a member of the community now, which is super exciting. And then like the engagement on the other side. So actually one of the metrics that Stripe's leadership really cares about is after all of the events, we send out a survey, fill out the survey, and we ask people to rank the event from 1 to 5. And then we're regularly reporting on what is the average sentiment score across all of the community events. On a scale from 1 to 5, we're really proud that so the community's done over 200 events so far in 2026, and the average sentiment score is 4.8. That's incredible and really important. And that's a way for us to know, are the people attending these events actually getting value? Is this meaningful? Are we driving like impact out in the world? And now we've launched stripecommunity.com. We're also looking at things like, how many people are joining the community, but also like how active are they in the community? Are they attending events? Are they posting in the new forum spaces? So starting to layer that in. And then on impact, we're having a lot of conversations actually about product adoption. So it feels like I'm going back to my Wix days in some ways of like, there are certain like corners of the Stripe product that are quite complex, especially that we're in this world with AI and agentic commerce. There's like new technology wrapping, just launching every second, and I think a lot of business owners feel like things are moving really quickly and they're afraid of getting left behind. And so we're really passionate about the vision for the Stripe community is that we've got you. You're not going to get left behind. We're going to bring you together with other business owners who are also struggling with this. And so you can figure out like, what is the future of the internet economy together? How are you leveraging these new tools? How you can get inspiration? Stripe being just like one part of that stack so that you can get paid, but not the only thing we're talking about in the community. And so it's really a fertile ground to think about how are we helping drive product adoption for Stripe, because we're really empowering users to come together and learn about how they can use these products and other products. So starting to have that conversation about, okay, we've established the community, it's engaged, we're going to continue to grow it, we're going to continue to engage it, but how can we also really start to help our builders and their communities better leverage Stripe's products and just the technology that's evolving today.
Yeah, I bet it's always a challenge with community builders to see like, hey, how do you kind of show the ROI to executives? And it's a it's like investing in anything, right? It's like a long game. Tell us a little bit about your experience kind of when working with executives and trying to talk about ROI of like building a community and doing all these initiatives.
Yeah, I think it's really important from day one, from the interview, to really ask, what are you looking to get out of this community? Why are you hiring a community person? What is the vision here? What is the intent? I ask those questions even when I'm interviewing for a role at a new company. And then once I'm inside, I conduct something I call a lay of the land process. So I interview key stakeholders and I ask them, what are you excited about with the community? What are you not excited about with the community? Where are you skeptical? And I really map out like, who are my organic champions? Who are the people that are going to be like super aligned with me? They're going to be accelerators. They're going to like help me get unblocked. And who are the people who are maybe skeptics, or maybe their vision is not aligned with my vision, or they're very focused on a very, very specific metric that may or may not be my focus. And I actually spend more time with the skeptics than the champions, and really fostering those relationships and understanding like why are they skeptics, and like what are their business challenges. And I'm a big believer actually in thinking about community as a platform, not as a lever. I think sometimes people build communities for brands and they over rotate towards one metric. And that really then silos them in this corner of the org chart. And then also it's hard to grow and evolve if like, okay, actually that metric stopped mattering. What are we going to do next? And so thinking about how do you establish community as a platform that could drive value across lots of different corners of the business, and can evolve over time as well. And that helps too, so that you're not trying to convince your, head of sales that like a customer support community is really valuable for them too. It's like, actually, this could be valuable for any stakeholder you're talking to, and this is why. And I think also, not giving constant updates. I send a biweekly update to an audience that is growing and growing and growing internally at Stripe. And I am constantly surprised by people who be like, oh, yeah, I know Ashley. I read her biweekly update. And it just shares things. It shares the net metrics. I think that's really important. Like, here's how many builders we have, how many events, here's the CSAT, but also shares the human story. So, like, here's a quote from somebody who attended an event and met their co-founder. And, like, here's a photo from, like, the first Stripe community event in Nigeria. And so always pairing the, like, metrics and the impact and the scale with the human element, because I think you'll be surprised how often executives actually need both, to see that, like, hey, this is like the faces of the people we're impacting as well.
Yeah, I love that. And what are some metrics you think are overrated, and when it comes to this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, we often default to, like, I think just never assuming there's some gold standard of, like, this is the metric that's going to apply across the board. I think you should always come into a new role in community, or just establishing a community, being really inquisitive about what makes sense for that company, and how do your metrics need to reflect that. I think that's just, like, overall advice. But you see, a lot of people rotating towards vanity metrics. Like, if you're only measuring growth and you're not measuring engagement, then, like, you might have a big community, but, like, under the hood, it's really sad and dead. Or if you're just growing and measuring engagement, but you're not measuring impact, it could start to have a negative effect on your perception internally of, like, okay, we have this big happy community, but, like, what is it really doing for the business? Like, why do we have it? Why does it exist? And so thinking about that full spectrum of metrics and not over rotating towards something that ultimately is meaningless by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Stripe has a big startup community, lots of founders here. Curious, to learn more about when should, founders hire their first community person, and then also what should they optimize for first?
Yeah, I mean, I think often, it's in my best interest to say always just start with hiring a community person. I think it's less about, like, who leads the community, when do you hire, and more like, are you doing it right? So as a founder, if you're not going to invest time in it, if you're not going to be strategic about it, if you're just going to slap a Slack channel up there and hope it works, then hire someone. Hire someone, but also don't just hire a warm body. Hire someone who's going to think about this strategically. I can't emphasize that enough. I think there's a misconception, especially not just at startups, at all companies, that, like, oh, the community person is just somebody friendly who's good at talking to people. And while, yes, ideally you want someone friendly who's good at talking to people, but that's kind of table stakes. If they can't communicate to you what is their strategy for building the community, and what value will it drive back for the business? Ultimately, you're going to get to a place 6 months from now, a year from now, and be like, why did we do this? Why did we hire this person? You're not setting them up for success. And so if you are going to hire someone, make sure you hire someone who's really thinking strategically about the community, and not just going to be really excited to talk to users. They should also be excited to talk to users. That's important too, but you have to have the strategy piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of, AI changing the, every function inside of a software company, and community is no exception. I'm curious to learn more about, how do you think AI will, impact communities, and what are some of the things that you folks are using? What's helping you? What's not helping you?
It's actually making communities even more important for brands. The head of community at HubSpot, his name's Evan Hamilton, has done a lot of really great writing about this. Like, highly recommend checking out. He has a newsletter called Community Manager Breakfast, and he's written a lot about this. When you look at LLMs, where they're sourcing their citations, they are in an outsized way sourcing them from community-oriented spaces like Reddit, like forums. LLMs love conversational style Q&A. They're really good at ironically good at identifying authentic content versus AI-driven content. And so the true, organic, authentic community content is what's getting cited, and that's actually what's informing people's decisions about what products they use and how they use those products. And so it's a really interesting moment where community is having even more impact and power on brands because people are sourcing their information from LLMs and LLMs are sourcing their information from communities, which is really interesting. I think that's like the bright and shiny version of it. I think the like we need to be wary version of it is being really intentional when you're establishing a community of like what is your policy around AI use? Like what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what do you think is healthy for your community, what do you think is not healthy for your community, and expressing that really explicitly. Any good community manager knows a community should have like community guidelines and do's and don'ts and moderation rules so like people know how to behave in the community. Need to think about AI in that way too. Is like what kind of use of AI would you like to see in the space and communicate that clearly. And also if there's a positive, exciting way you want people to use AI, encourage that, help foster that as well. I think there's a lot of ways that communities could build tools like some of the vibe coding tools to like create things together, to collaborate more effectively, even if they're not in the same room. So if that's something you want to encourage in your community, you should really foster it, and think about how that can show up too.
Yeah, I love that. What opportunities are you more excited about? And 5 years from now, like what do you think a great community will look like?
Yeah. Specifically around AI or just in general?
Yeah, just in general.
I'm excited that there is more and more conversation about this idea of community as a platform, as a community that can have influence across a company. I think you're going to see less of like, here's a forum and it's for customer support, or, like, here's a user group program and it's just for this. I think you're going to see worlds where like community really infuses lots of different corners of the business, where the community is members of the community and the most engaged members of the community are truly the celebrities from within the business. I think this is something that Airbnb did really well, of like really thinking about like how do we treat our hosts like celebrities, how do we give them critical opportunities, how do we engage them in every part of our business. And the more companies do that, the more they're going to rotate towards a really strong user first perspective. I think often it's easy to have user first be one of your core values for your company, but if you aren't talking to your users and engaging them meaningfully in the creation of your product and your business, then it's just not the same. And community allows you to do that in a really meaningful, scaled way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Ashley. I'm going to ask a few rapid questions,
Okay.
and then we're going to leave it up for the audience, and we're going to pick some questions from the audience to answer. So, yeah, would love to learn more about community-led growth or product-led growth. I think this one's kind of curious what you think.
Both. They work
Both.
together. I'm going to give a lot of both answers. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
in
totally.
advance.
And what's one community that every founder should study?
Ooh, I mean, I gave the example of Figma. I think that one's like especially applicable for like early stage founders that are thinking about like how do we get that like those first few users? How do we grow? How do we amplify product-led growth through community? So I think Figma's a really good one. A really classic one you hear referenced a lot, but I think is really valuable, especially for like that more enterprise B2B company, is Salesforce and the Trailblazers community. Erica Cool, who founded it, is legendary. That community is legendary, and like really shows what a community looks like when it's like super, super mature and full-fledged. And then outside of the brand side of things, a community I really admire and has really inspired me in my career is actually Creative Mornings. It is not a business community, but I have just always been inspired by the way Tina and her team very intentionally fosters that community and thinks strategically about how do they empower their chapter hosts, how do they create shared experiences and values, and like even how does that get infused into the visual side of the community. So that's one that's always inspired me, that's maybe more of a sleeper hit because it isn't a big brand.
Yeah, I love Creative Mornings. It's actually a big inspiration for us on how we do our recap videos for the Toronto events. But I love Creative Mornings. Like, I guess they're still alive. I
Yeah.
remember back in the day, I used to watch their videos quite a lot.
So active. I
Um,
mean, I just moved from Chattanooga, and the Chattanooga chapter is still like super vibrant. People, everyone I knew went to Creative Mornings in Chattanooga. So yeah, definitely still active.
yeah, I love that. One book that you'd recommend to everyone.
On community,
Yeah.
I'm
I
assuming
mean, it
so.
could be
So
anything. Yeah.
I know. It's like I can give you lots of books. No, for community specifically, there's two actually. Um, when I was at Airbnb, I actually would buy them for new members of my team when it was like very small, early stage team. So the art of community just really is a great way of like laying out what are the core principles of like what defines a community. I think kind of going back to the idea of like you don't just build a Slack channel and hope people come. It gives you a great framework for how to build a community strategy. Um, and then I complement that two arts. It's the two arts. So the art of community and the art of gathering. The art of gathering is kind of the same thing. It gives you a really great framework about how to approach events from a really strategic perspective. Often you see people like, oh, we're gonna get a venue and we're gonna get some beer and some pizza and it's an event, right? No, you really need to sit down and think about like why are we gathering people? What is our intent? How does that intent infuse every detail of how we're planning the event? So those are the two books I often recommend. And this isn't a book, but kind of going back to the art of community being a really good blueprint for strategy. There's a resource online called the Community Canvas. If you Google it, it's just like a free resource online, and it actually has worksheets you can fill out. When I was at Airbnb, I actually, on the experiences team, we had all these different categories that were launching of new experiences like animals and nightlife. And often I'd have like the leaders of these categories come to me and be like, I want to start a community. And I'm like, why do you need a community? Who's in the community? How, asking all these questions. And I started actually just giving them the community canvas. There's a minimal viable community template, and it's a worksheet you fill out. And so I would actually literally give that and be like, fill this out, and then let's sit down and let's talk about it together. And that's like a great seed for your community. So I like to recommend those things because it guides people towards thinking about community and gathering from a very strategic perspective and from a very well designed perspective from square one, because that's so critical.
I love that. What's one misconception people have about community?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, I mentioned this idea of like communities just being friendly and talking to people, and that's all you need. You really need to be thoughtful. You need to have strategy. See what I said before. This, if you build it, they will come mentality of like, oh, community is just a forum space or a Slack channel. No, like the online space is just a tool that a community uses. And if you have the tool by itself, it is not a community. It will languish. So those are the two that I often encounter the most out in the wild.
Hmm, interesting. And what's one piece of advice that you'd give your younger self?
Oh, goodness. Um, you know, I think I would have learned about the business sooner. I mean, I did over time, clearly. I feel like each company I worked for gave me a different education in business. Actually, I was chatting with a colleague on Monday about how we were joking about how working at Airbnb is like getting an MBA in a lot of ways. But I wish I had understood sooner how important that was and plugged in sooner into and I see with this a lot of community managers of they kind of in their corner building community and they're not actually paying attention to what's happening in the business. Like what are the priorities for the business? What are the core challenges? Like what is everybody else at the company trying to solve? What metrics do they care about? I wish I had learned about that and cared about that sooner. I think it would have avoided a lot of pain for me later on. Unfortunately, I did eventually and got to learn at really great companies about it. But if I went back, I would have paid attention and accelerated that learning sooner.
Yeah, totally. If you could have dinner with anyone in tech, what would it be? Who would it be?
Uh, I mean, this is maybe a cop out answer, but I just have dinner with a lot of community managers,
Yeah.
different tech companies.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we really focus on this is this like super famous person, whereas like
Mm,
I actually really enjoy meeting the other people in the trenches that are doing what I'm doing. there's been like a lot of energy around that, and I moved back to New York a few months ago, and there's been a lot more of that in New York lately, of
Mm.
community people getting together and sharing. I'm getting coffee with another community leader at another tech company tomorrow, and those conversations are so fruitful, because you can really dig in and be really honest about like, hey, how are you dealing with this situation? It's really gnarly. I'd really love your perspective on how to do it, and I have those conversations a lot, and so I would just love to have dinner with other community people.
Yeah. And final question, if someone today is watching, they have like 10 customers, no community, limited resources, what's the very first thing, they should do tomorrow morning to build a thriving community?
Talk to those 10 customers
Love it.
immediately. And like I was saying earlier, ask them what they would want out of a community, how they'd want to engage. That's really your blueprint. That's where you start.
Amazing. Ashley, well, thank you so much. This has been incredible. We're going to take a question from the audience, and then that should be it. So we have a question here from Melissa. So Melissa's asking, at Wix, how did your team engage with the community for product adoption? If you took a step back from push/email, etc., was it webinars, in-person events? Yeah, that's our question.
Really, it was through our Wix Ambassador program that we had at the time. And well, really, we started by doing meetups. And as I mentioned, my team got so burnt out. It's like, we're traveling constantly, we're never home, we're tired, we're living on an airplane. And so I really started to scratch my head on like, how can we have these really high touch engagement and education moments? Because these meetups were really impactful at helping our users understand complex products that allowed them to adopt complex concepts that allow them to adopt and understand new products. But it didn't scale. My team was exhausted. And so started to really noodle, how could we do this at scale? And at the same time, the company was starting to focus more and more on something that at the time they called Wix Pros. I can't remember if they still I think they still call them Wix Pros. And these are professional web designers that use Wix to design websites for other people. And going back to what I said about who's like living and breathing your product, who's doing it professionally. And so we had this hypothesis of, would Wix Pros around the world want to lead these meetups instead of us going and leading them? And so we developed the Wix Ambassador program. We started reaching out to Wix Pros and saying like, hey, is this something that would be interesting to you? How would you want to do it? And I remember by the time I left Wix, we had something like on average, like 4 Wix events happened every single day somewhere in the world through the community. It scaled so quickly and so effectively. And it was really powerful because for the Wix Pros, they wanted to be known in their city or in their community as the expert in Wix. It was really powerful for their careers and their profession. And they gave our users like a really knowledgeable person who could engage them in person. And we were able to do that at scale all over the world, in every corner of the world. And we're seeing something similar today at Stripe, where a lot of our Stripe community builders are really engaged in Stripe professionally, are really excited to be thought leaders around Stripe and engage and teach other people about it. And so that allows us to have that like really high touch. And I think that's important for a lot of product adoption. And where communities especially has outsized impact is the product adoption that is complex, or the product that is complex. So if you can't understand it through an email or a push notification, that's where community is powerful, where it requires a conversation, where it requires explaining, where it requires social proof. You can do that in an event really effectively, in a way that like is going to be hard to do through a written communication. And if it's in person, which is nice, if you're able to do that scaled in person through partnering with your community, then it's even more engaging and hands-on than a webinar. Because in a webinar, you can answer questions, but it's not quite the same. You can't like sit down with a user and look over their shoulder. You can't have that back and forth. You can't coach them in the same way. So doing that, having that in-person motion that scaled was really powerful because it allowed that like really hands-on interaction and workshopping.
Amazing. Melissa, thanks for that question. And let's see if there's any other questions. I think that's the questions that I see on LinkedIn. I think we have one question that came in from Julia Balak. So what are some characteristics of the most successful ambassador programs?
Most important one, going back to the idea of this like green shoots, is identifying the persona that is already motivated to foster community? Who are the people that are already out there doing this and excited to do it? And then build the program around them, because they're going to be rewarded and motivated by the very thing you ask them to do. It will be so much more sustainable and successful. The mistake I see a lot of people make is like really over rotating towards extrinsic rewards versus intrinsic. So saying, okay, go do this behavior you've never done before, and in exchange, we'll give you a t-shirt. And then the next time you do it, you're going to have stickers. And at a certain point, like, I joke, I call it the Mary Kay problem. I realize this is a reference that dates me, but Mary Kay is this like makeup MLM. And once you reach a certain threshold of selling makeup, you get a pink Cadillac. And so I joke it's the Mary Kay dilemma. It's like, are you going to eventually give all these people pink Cadillacs? No, that's not sustainable. That's not going to scale. And so really understanding who is the person that is already motivated to do this and designing the program around them is going to make the program so much more valuable for those people and for the brand. It's going to be a win-win versus like finding a group of people and trying to convince them to do a new behavior. That's going to be a lot harder, and they're probably going to get a lot less value out of it.
Great. Hopefully that answers your question, Julia. Thanks for asking. We have another question coming in from Ariel. She's a community lead at Airbnb, actually. So she is asking, could you share a few key metrics you use to measure community success at Wix, Airbnb, and Stripe?
Yeah. So at Wix, early on, we looked at, because we were focused on, kind of go back as like it changes depending on the time, the company. So at Wix, early on, we were really focused on word of mouth marketing. So how many people had we actually engaged through community activities? We were really focused on like reach and touch and scale. Then over time, when we focused more on product adoption, actually early on, we were thinking about like product feedback. So first is like, how are we getting product feedback to the product teams? And so we measured that by, on a quarterly basis, we'd interview the product teams we'd worked with, and we'd say like, what feedback did you get from your engagement with the community and our team? What did you implement from that feedback, and how did that drive conversion? Because like those product teams are going to know, like, thanks to this feedback, we learned X, Y, and Z. We changed the product this way, and actually we saw a conversion lift of X percent. Like most product teams will be able to tell you something to that degree. And then when we started looking at product adoption, we actually were tracking like who attended the events, what was their user ID, did we see their behavior change over time, were they more successful? Similar thing with Airbnb. With Airbnb experiences, actually, I mentioned the host summits that we used to do. And so actually at Airbnb, there was like a series of metrics on the experiences side. I'm going to hone in on experiences that we knew if hosts adopted these behaviors or changed these behaviors, that they would have a meaningful impact on revenue for the business. But a lot of those behaviors were really hard to convince hosts to do. So things like adjusting their price, that's really, really sensitive. Hosts are very sensitive to that. And if Airbnb told a host to change their price, often that would not lead to a very happy result. But if a host heard from another host, hey, I adjusted my price in this way, I got 10x more bookings, I made this much more revenue overall, then they were far more likely to adopt it. And so what we actually did is we measured like what did these hosts look like coming into these host summits, and then did we see a stat sig lift in these behaviors afterwards, and how did that stat sig lift in those behaviors translate into revenue on the other side, because we had that equation of like these levers equal this revenue. So really the theme across all of this is thinking about like, what is the problem your business is trying to solve that is really, really critical, and how can community influence it in a way that other channels and levers can't? I think that's the critical one, because what you're often going to hear is like, okay, you changed it, but this isn't like super like, like the community is expensive and it's like it doesn't scale. And so I think you have to always be thinking about like, how does community actually like, how is that actually having impact relative to the scale you have? So like, yeah, maybe an email is more scaled and cheaper, but is it going to have the same sort of impact as community? And if impact's having more community than the email, how is that more valuable, and that the expense of it just as worth it? So always kind of thinking about what is community's unique value driver, and how is that meaningful for the business? So always doing that calculus in your head and doing it regularly, because it's going to change, especially if you're at a tech company. It's going to change every quarter. It's going to change every half. And so you need to be constantly evolving. You can't like, here's my metric, I'm going to have it until I die. That's just not the way it's going to work.
For sure. Great. Well, thanks so much for the question, Ariel. I think that's all the questions we have from the audience. Ashley, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing such great insights on how to build communities. And we'd love to learn how people can connect with you. What's the best way for people to reach out to you? Let us know.
Yeah, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I apologize in advance if I'm not super responsive. My inbox is a jungle, but please connect. I will get back eventually, I promise. And then the other one, maybe a little selfishly, is stripecommunity.com is live. I am on the community. It's a great place to just like engage with the Stripe community and my team generally. So definitely check that out too. But yeah, LinkedIn's a great place to connect with me. And I am always happy to do coffee chats with other community managers. Like I said, I love chatting community with people. I tend to do several coffee chats a week. So please reach out.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. We're going to have this obviously posted on LinkedIn and also put up the notes. I'm excited to type them up and share it with everyone else. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everybody.